12 people have been executed by the state of Illinois. Charles Walker, September 12, 1990. In 1990, the state of Illinois executed Charles Thomas Walker, a convicted murderer, for the June 1983 killings of Mascouta residents Kevin Paul, 21 years old, and his fiancée Sharon Winker, 25 years old. Due to the lethal injection machine's inability to force the chemicals through the kinked lines, the execution was considered botched. Walker was born in Fayetteville, Illinois on April 28, 1940. His parents, Lucille and Jess Walker, separated when Charles was still a small child. His stepfather and father were both alcoholics. When Walker was 8 years old, his father handed him some moonshine to taste, and he became intoxicated. By the time he was 12, his stepfather was taking him to neighborhood bars to get drunk. Walker began committing crimes at the age of 14, perpetrating burglary and other small-time infractions. He was caught purchasing beer for his younger cousin a year later, and he was charged with contributing to the delinquency of a child. Walker left home, left school after his sophomore year, and moved to Florida. 6 months later, he went back to Illinois and carried on with his criminal life, breaking into other homes. Walker spent 6.5 years in Menard Correctional Center after being found guilty of burglary at the age of 17. Walker stole cash and alcohol from a tavern less than a year after being freed. For 4 more years, he was returned to Menard. Walker's father was shot dead in O'Fallon in 1961. Before being released, the guy found guilty of the murder was imprisoned for just 2 years. Walker embarked on a drinking binge in 1969, 2 months after being released from prison. He was shot in the face during a gunfight with Whiteside County Police while intoxicated, and he lost his right eye as a result. Walker received a 6-year prison sentence after being charged with attempted murder. He was given a 4-year prison sentence after committing an armed robbery at a gas station after being released. Walker married Stella when he was released from prison, although they were often at odds. Because of his constant drinking, she would eventually file for a divorce. Walker woke up on June 18, 1983, had some vodka and beer, and then went fishing at Silver Creek for the day. Walker met Kevin Paul, age 21, and his fiancée Sharon Winker, age 25, by the creek. Walker decided to rob them after talking to them for some time by pulling a .25 caliber handgun. He took Paul's wallet, secured their hands with tape, and tied them on a tree. Paul then informed Walker that he knew who he was and that he would not get away with the crime. Walker chose to murder them both out of fear that they would report him to the police. He shot Paul in the right temple, killing him, and then he shot Winker in the back of the skull, killing her. Walker drank beer at the Runway Lounge bar near Scott Air Force Base after the killings. He spent several hours talking to the owner till after midnight. Then, when everyone had gone, Walker got up, pulled out his gun, and robbed the bar. The owner chased after Walker as he ran off with the stolen money, got into a car, and crashed Walker's car. Walker fired, striking the windshield of the other car but avoiding the owner. Walker escaped as smoke filled the area after the incident. Upon arrival, authorities examined the car and discovered several items that were verified to be Paul and Winker's. Furthermore, the murder weapon was also found. Walker escaped to his half-sister's home and requested a ride to a bus stop in St. Louis. After that, he purchased a bus ticket to his ex-wife's home in Tacoma, Washington. Later, he called an old lover while hitchhiking to Walden, Colorado. The ex-girlfriend called the Jackson County Sheriff's Department and turned him in. Walker was taken into custody, refused extradition, and was picked up by St. Clair County Police on July 16. Walker entered a guilty plea to 2 charges of murder on July 27, 1983. Instead of having a judge decide his case, he opted for a jury trial. In a little more than an hour, the jury, 6 men and 6 women, returned a guilty verdict. Walker received a death sentence on October 13, 1983. He chose not to challenge his sentence any further in 1987. Walker was declared mentally competent by the Illinois Supreme Court in 1988, allowing him to forego additional legal appeals. He was put to death by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center on September 12, 1990. In more than 28 years, he was the first person executed in Illinois. Blackberry pie, biscuits, and fried wild rabbit were his last meal. A kink in the plastic tube caused the flow of chemicals into Walker's body to cease, delaying his execution. Walker spoke with convicted serial killer John Wayne Gacy while he was on death row. He revealed in an interview that he and Gacy would never discuss Walker's wish to be put to death, only generic topics like ball scores. 4 years after Walker's execution, Gacy faced execution as well. John Wayne Gacy, May 10, 1994. At least 33 young men and boys were essayed, tortured, and killed by serial killer and sex offender Gacy in the Chicago, Illinois area. His reputation as the killer clown stemmed from his public clowning before his murders were discovered. All of Gacy's known killings took place in his ranch-style home. On the pretense of performing a magic act, he would usually entice a victim to his house and trick them into wearing handcuffs. After torturing and essaying his captive, he would either strangle or asphyxiate his victim to death. 3 victims were buried somewhere on his property, 4 were dumped in the Des Plaines River, and 26 victims were interred in the crawl area of his house. In 1968, Gacy was found guilty of the sodomy of a juvenile boy in Waterloo, Iowa, and was given a 10-year prison term, but he only spent 18 months locked up. In 1972, he killed his first victim. By the end of 1975, he had killed 2 more times, and following his divorce from his second wife in 1976, he killed at least 30 more. Gacy was arrested on December 21, 1978, as a result of the investigation into the disappearance of Robert Peast, a teenager from Des Plaines. Gacy received a death sentence on March 13, 1980. He was sent to Stateville Correctional Center to be put to death early on May 9, 1994. He and his family were permitted to have a private picnic on the jail grounds that afternoon. Gacy ordered a bucket of KFC, fresh strawberries, a dozen fried shrimp, French fries, and a Diet Coke for his final meal. Before being led to the Stateville execution chamber that night, a Catholic priest performed the last rites for him. An estimated 1,000 people gathered outside the correctional facility in the hours before Gacy's execution. While there were a few demonstrators opposed to the death sentence, the majority of people there were fiercely in favor of the execution. The process of giving the fatal injection started around 12:40 a.m. However, the chemicals used in the execution unexpectedly hardened and clogged the IV tubing. The execution resumed after the team swapped out the clogged tube. It took 18 minutes to complete. The issue was attributed by anesthesiologists to the inexperience of the jail officials in carrying out an execution. Illinois reportedly adopted a different lethal injection technique as a result of this incident. Having been labeled as a psychopath, Gacy showed no remorse for his acts. His last words to his attorney prior to his execution were that the state was killing him and that his death would not make up for the deaths of others. The phrase, "kiss my ass," was reportedly his last words. However, prosecutor William Kunkel said in 2020 that it was said to a jail official and wasn't included in any formal statement made before Gacy was put to death. Gacy's brain was extracted on May 10, 1994 at 12:58 a.m. following confirmation of his death. It is owned by Helen Morrison, a defense witness at Gacy's trial, who has conducted interviews with Gacy and other serial killers in an effort to identify the common traits of violent sociopaths. He was cremated, and it is unknown where his ashes are now. Only 28 of Gacy's victims have been positively identified. The youngest were Samuel Stapleton and Michael Marino, both 14. The eldest were Francis Alexander and Russell Nelson, both 21. James Free Jr., March 22, 1995. James Free was found guilty of killing 34-year-old Bonnie Serpico in 1978. While on vacation from the Army, he sneaked into the office of a Chicago suburb data processing company and attempted to essay Mrs. Serpico and a coworker while wearing a towel over his face and armed with a knife and revolver. Free shot Serpico to death after she tried to run. Additionally, he shot the coworker, who lived. He was apprehended and sentenced to death. His last words were, "Taking my life will not bring back the victims. Capital punishment is not the answer." He also asked for forgiveness. He received a final meal of shrimp, French fries, strawberry cheesecake, and soda. In a rare occurrence, Free was just one of two people executed the same day by the same state. In less than an hour, another inmate was put to death. Hernando Williams, March 22, 1995. A young black man named Williams abducted a white woman named Linda Goldstone from the Northwestern Medical Center parking lot in Chicago, Illinois on March 29, 1978. Goldstone, a mother of a small boy and the wife of a doctor, was headed to teach a Lamaze class when Williams came up to her with a revolver. Williams forced her to partially undress and climb into the front seat of his car after she landed him her money. Goldstone was held captive by Williams for over 2 days. Williams was on bail for the kidnapping and essay of another lady when he abducted Goldstone. He spent several days driving around with her in the back of his car, even bringing her to a court hearing in Maywood, Illinois. Williams exited the courtroom a comparatively free man after the assistant state's attorney informed the judge during the hearing that he was not prepared for trial. Upon his return to the court parking lot, he noticed a group of people who seemed to be conversing with his car's trunk. With Goldstone still in the trunk, he departed the area after telling those individuals to go away. The license plate number was supplied to the police by one of the people who had spoken to Goldstone when she was in the courthouse trunk. The tip was not followed by the police. Williams eventually acknowledged that he had essayed Goldstone over their 2 nights together in various lodge-ins. On April 1, 1978, at approximately 5 in the morning, Williams released Goldstone, giving her $1.25 for her bus fare, and instructed her to board the bus and travel home. Rather, she went up to a house, knocked on the door, and requested assistance. A firefighter from Chicago unlocked the door. She was informed by the firefighter that he would contact the police. Then he left her outside and shut the door. Williams, in the meantime, had grown anxious, questioning whether Goldstone would follow through on her pledge to board the bus. She was talking to a man inside the house when he went back around the block. Williams exited his vehicle and called Goldstone once the firefighter had shut the door. After guiding her to a back alley, he shot her twice and then left. A few hours later, Williams was discovered by Chicago police at his parents' house, cleaning out his car's trunk. Williams was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. He entered a guilty plea to aggravated kidnapping, robbery, essay, and murder at the insistence of his lawyers. Every member of the crew hoped Hernando would not be executed. The plan didn't work. Black people were routinely executed from the jury by the state prosecutors. Hernando Williams was given the death penalty by the all-white jury in January 1980. At the age of 40, he was put to death by lethal injection on March 25, 1995. He had no last words. His final meal was the same as Free's: shrimp, French fries, strawberry cheesecake, and soda. Girvies Davis, May 17, 1995. Between 1978 and 1979, American serial killer Girvies Davis and Richard Ricky Holman killed at least 4 people in robberies in Illinois. Shooting witnesses was easier than donning a mask, according to Davis, the elder of the two, who spoke to an investigator. The .22 caliber killers was the nickname given to the two. Holman, who was too young to be put to death, is currently serving a life sentence while Davis was executed. Davis was raised in poverty in East St. Louis as one of 8 children. Annie Quinley Petulat, his 4th-grade teacher, called him a poor, pathetic boy who just sat there and said nothing. Police knew Davis as a small-time thief, a resale of stolen items, and an alcoholic before the killings. Frida Mueller, 78, was reportedly robbed and killed by Davis and Holman on December 8, 1978. After shooting her to death, the two took her checkbook, billfold, and television set. Although Frida's murder was brought up during their trials, Davis and Holman were never charged with her death. Charles Beeble, an 89-year-old wheelchair user, was shot and killed inside his trailer home on December 22, 1978. Later that night, Jean Beeble Moore, his daughter, found his body. 2 watches, a billfold, a number of guns, and a television set were taken by Davis and Holman. This murder was committed by Holman. Jean Moore offered a $5,000 reward for information that would result in the arrest and conviction of her father's killers prior to their apprehension. John Ortel, 84, was robbed and killed in his trailer by Davis and Holman on May 12, 1979. Ortel was stabbed and shot. This murder was committed by Davis. Davis and Holman executed 83-year-old blind woman Esther Sepmeyer on July 13, 1979, while she was kneeling in front of her bed and praying for her life. Rodney Sepmeyer, her grandson, discovered the body. A .22 caliber semi-automatic rifle, a stereo, a color TV, a lawnmower, and a replica antique radio were all taken. Holman was the murderer. Following a poorly executed holdup at an auto parts store, Davis and Holman were taken into custody. The two shot James Ostman, the store's owner, as soon as they walked in. He was hit in the arm by the bullet. Frank Cash, a 21-year-old clerk, rushed to the rear of the store as Ostman fell. Cash was followed by Holman and Davis, who shot Cash dead while he was pleading for his life. When Ostman heard the gunfire, he reached for his own handgun, faced the two, and shot them twice. Davis was wounded in the back and sent to the hospital. On August 30, 1979, medical staff called the police and Davis was taken into custody. A few weeks later, Holman was taken into custody as well. In the end, authorities connected Davis to 10 robberies that left 9 people dead and 7 injured. Frida Miller, 78, Edward Campbell, 35, Mary Prestito, 39, Charles Beeble, 89, Marvin Ford, 25, James Perdue, 63, John Ortel, 84, Esther Sepmeyer, 83, and Frank Cash, 21, were the casualties, both confirmed and suspected. Since Holman and Davis had already been given the maximum punishment, they were never tried for all of the killings. Later, prosecutors said that the pair had committed so many killings that they didn't think it would be worthwhile to pursue every single case. One of Davis's claimed victims, Perdue, employed John Krangle. After being shot 4 times, 3 times in the abdomen and once in the throat, Krangle passed away 6 years later at the age of 52. According to Krangle's daughter, he had named Davis as the shooter of both him and his boss. For the murders of Charles Beeble, John Ortel, Frank Cash, and Esther Sepmeyer, Davis was found guilty on 4 counts of murder. He was also found guilty of attempting to kill John Ostman by shooting him. Cindy, Davis's wife, stated during his sentence hearing that he was not a violent guy and that he should be spared execution. She would visit him in prison. Davis was sentenced to 30 years in prison for shooting Ostman, 8 years in prison for killing Ortel and Cash, and death for killing Beeble. After an appeal, his second death sentence for the murder of Sepmeyer was lowered to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite not being present when Beeble was killed, Davis was found guilty under the felony murder rule because he should have known that Holman would kill Beeble because he and Holman had committed similar robbery slayings together. For the murders of Ortel, Cash, and Sepmeyer, as well as the attempted murder of Ostman, Holman was found guilty on 3 counts of murder. He was sentenced to 75 years in prison for the murders of Ortel and Cash, and another 25 years for shooting Ostman. Because Holman was only a month away from turning 18, he was spared the death sentence for killing Sepmeyer and instead received a life term without the possibility of parole. The judge informed Holman that the life sentence was required to safeguard the public and that he did not think he could be rehabilitated because he had demonstrated no remorse. He was never put on trial for Beeble's murder. In 1979, Keith Harris, another man, was falsely convicted of Mark Ressman's attempted murder and given a 50-year jail sentence. After handing $200 to 2 robbers on December 4, 1978, Ressman, a gas station clerk, was shot 7 times but survived. Ressman recognized Harris from a lineup, but there was no tangible proof that connected him to the crime. Police now believes that Davis and Holman were guilty for the crime since they had confessed to it, and ballistic evidence connected them to Ressman's shooting. Harris's sentence was lowered to 30 years, and on May 1, 2001, he was freed from prison. In 2003, Governor George Ryan fully pardoned him. For his incarceration, Harris was compensated with a little over $150,000. As a spiritual counselor to other prisoners, Davis became an ordained priest while incarcerated on death row after learning how to read. He was put to death by lethal injection in 1995 following a series of unsuccessful appeals and the rejected request for clemency to Governor Jim Edgar. After declining a final meal, Davis said, "I wish Godspeed to all." At 12:28 in the morning, he was declared dead. Holman is currently completing his term at Pontiac Correctional Center. Due to the Miller v. Alabama and Montgomery v. Louisiana decisions, which restricted life sentences without parole for children, he has attempted in recent years to get his life sentence reduced to a term of years. Holman's attempts have failed, though, and as of 2024, he is still serving a life sentence. Charles Albanese, September 20, 1995. From 1980 to 1981, Albanese poisoned 3 cousins in McHenry, Illinois with arsenic to get their inheritance, bank money, real estate, life insurance payouts, and pension money. In 2 different trials, he received death sentences. On June 13, 1937, Charles Michael Albanese was born in Chicago, Illinois. The businessman Michael Albanese Sr. and his wife Clara were his parents, and he was their first son. Although not much is known about his early years, acquaintances would remember Albanese as a spoiled brat who always wanted to be a big shot, a driven young man who aimed to make as much money as possible with the least amount of effort. He was employed by Morton Grove-based Norwood Motors Inc. as a vehicle salesman in the middle of the 1960s. On February 1, 1965, Albanese and an unnamed accomplice broke into the home of 61-year-old CTA bus driver Emmett Farrell while posing as detectives and took $160 from him. This was his first documented crime. A week or so later, Albanese was apprehended and the Farrells positively recognized him as one of the burglars based on information from a neighbor who had jotted down the license plate of his car. Shortly after, a grand jury charged him on multiple charges of car theft, the latter under the alias Charles Romaine, and armed robbery. He was found guilty and given a 5-year probation term. His first wife left him after 6 years of marriage and relocated to Wisconsin with their 3 girls. He later married his second wife, but not much is known about their connection. In 1972, over Labor Day weekend, Albanese married Virginia Mueller in Las Vegas while still legally married to his second wife. In the years that followed, his second ex-wife would file 2 further complaints against him, one in 1977 for failing to pay $1,475 in child support, and another in 1980 for failing to support a petition that was filed in Chicago. Albanese appeared to have a happy marriage despite his legal issues, and he had a salary of $60,000 a year as president of the Allied Die Casting Company, which belonged to his father. Albanese and his family relocated to Spring Grove in 1978, where he became known to his neighbors as a man who enjoyed showing off his wealth and power. He possessed a number of high-end vehicles and yearly vacationed in Jamaica or Marco Island, Florida, with his wife and 2 daughters. While his wife's mother, 69-year-old Marion Mueller, resided with her own mother, 89-year-old Mary Lambert, at the Leisure Village Retirement Complex in Fox Lake, Charles started to visit often in the middle of 1980. He frequently brought small gifts, such as jewelry and trinkets, and whenever he could, he would eat dinner with them. He would gradually persuade Lambert to give her daughter her financial assets during these visits, avoiding the other daughter and son altogether. Then, without anybody in his family knowing, he called the owner of a metal plating business in Elkhorn, Wisconsin, to whom he occasionally supplied scrap zinc, supposedly to find out the best way to eradicate some pests from his house. Albanese was given arsenic and given instructions on how to use it on the man's advice, and he gradually added tiny amounts of the poison to Mueller's food over the course of the following few months. The first death occurred on August 6, 1980, when Mueller started experiencing severe vomiting and diarrhea. She was sent to McHenry Hospital and passed on the same day. A heart attack was listed as the reason of her death. Only 12 days later, Lambert was stricken by a similar illness and sent to the St. Therese Hospital in Waukegan, where she died from what was called natural causes. Locals were alarmed by the two women's unexpected deaths, and there was also suspicions that the village's water and food supplies had been tainted. The Lake County Health Department responded by starting a thorough inquiry into the restaurants and the sewage system, but all tests came back negative. Life gradually returned to normal after the investigation was completed because there were no more suspicious chemicals or activities found. Due to their passing, Albanese's wife Virginia received the approximately $150,000 in Mueller and Lambert's estates. Shortly after the incident, on September 4, 1980, Albanese went to a meeting with his father. There, they got into a fight, and Michael Sr. said that he no longer wanted Albanese in the company. A few days later, the older Albanese merely demoted him to treasurer, changing his position. Albanese started bringing homemade cookies to his father's workplace and snacks for his younger brother in what seemed to be an expression of appreciation. Michael Jr. had to be hospitalized for severe nausea and vomiting just 4 days after he started doing so. Both Michael Sr. and Michael Jr. were hospitalized multiple times in the next months as a result of severe illnesses. The former passed away on May 16, 1981, at the age of 69. Alvin Korhammer, the McHenry County coroner, discovered arsenic residues in Michael Sr.'s serum while performing the autopsy on his body. After learning that Mueller and Lambert also had ties to the Albanese family, he subsequently got in touch with Robert H. Babcock, the Lake County's coroner, who had looked into their deaths the year before. Virginia Albanese gave each coroner permission to have the bodies of her relatives exhumed and analyzed, and both examinations showed high levels of arsenic. Charles was one of the members of the Albanese family whose background was checked by McHenry Police Chief George Passanelli following this revelation. They discovered his criminal history, potential motivations for the acts, and the knowledge that the operator of the metal plating company had sold him arsenic as they dug deeper into his past. Through a travel agency, the task force discovered that Albanese had organized another Thanksgiving vacation to Jamaica, where he would be joined by his mother, Clara, and wife. The investigators went in and detained Albanese at his McHenry office on November 18, 1981, fearing that he might target his mother because of her $500,000 income. He was later accused of stealing from the company's stock, attempting to kill his brother, and committing all 3 killings. It was determined that Albanese would face charges in 2 different trials because 2 of the 3 murders occurred in different jurisdictions, one in McHenry County for Mueller's murder and another in Lake County for the killings of Lambert, his father, and his brother's attempted murder. He entered the plea of not guilty on all counts during the Lake County trial, which was the first one. The trial was transferred to Bloomington and set for May 1982 as a result of the case's pretrial notoriety. On May 18, the jury found Albanese guilty on all counts after just over 7 hours of deliberation. Despite the fact that he had no significant criminal past, the prosecution argued that he should be executed because he had demonstrated no remorse. Albanese was given an electric chair death sentence 2 days later. He looked exhausted and lacked energy as the judge read out his punishment. Albanese was moved to Lake County to face trial for Lambert's murder that same October. On October 26, Albanese was found guilty of Mueller's murder, despite his claims that his brother or a random assailant was truly behind all the murders, and his lawyers' fruitless attempts to get the charges dropped on the grounds of circumstantial evidence. He received another death sentence a few days later. Albanese was also sentenced to 5 years in prison on 2 theft crimes and 60 years in prison for the attempted murder of his brother. Albanese made several unsuccessful attempts in the ensuing years to have convictions reversed and his sentence appealed. He insisted on his innocence and accused the authorities of covering up the facts of the case until his execution by lethal injection at the Stateville Correctional Center on September 20, 1995. He asked for prime rib, baked potatoes, garlic bread, coffee, Coca-Cola, and pistachio ice cream for his final meal. Before being executed, Albanese said thank you to the warden but made no further remarks. George Del Vecchio, November 22, 1995. The state sought the death penalty when George Del Vecchio was found guilty in 1979 of murder, essay, deviant essay, and burglary. His victim was a 6-year-old boy. This, however, was not his first murder. The first took place during a 2-day criminal spree that Del Vecchio and 2 young friends were on in early February 1965. They chose to rob and kill Fred Christensen, an elderly man they stumbled upon on the second day. While his comrades kicked the dying man to stop him from pleading for assistance, Del Vecchio shot Mr. Christensen 9 times. $11 were found in Mr. Christensen's wallet. Del Vecchio confessed to the murder after being taken into custody by the police. Del Vecchio was just 16 years old at the time of Mr. Christensen's murder. He was about to be 17 years old on March 1st. Del Vecchio was charged as an adult, entering a guilty plea, and received his sentence before turning 17. He was turned over to the Illinois Youth Commission and placed in a juvenile jail facility. Del Vecchio was returned to court to receive an adult sentence once he turned 21. When deciding how to sentence the confessed murderer, the presiding judge had a lot of discretion. Del Vecchio might have received a minimum sentence of 14 years or a maximum term of life in prison. The parties agreed that if Del Vecchio had been punished after turning 17 in 1965, a court would have had precisely this amount of discretion. Del Vecchio had a stellar record while he was a resident of the Adolescent Center, and the judge reportedly took that into account. Del Vecchio was given a sentence of at least 14 years in an adult prison, as required by law. Only a few years after his sentencing, in April 1973, he was granted parole after being credited with time served and continuing to be a model prisoner. Sadly, Del Vecchio's exemplary behavior stopped after he was released from prison. He struck once more in 1977. Tony Canzonieri, 6 years old, was his victim this time. Del Vecchio reportedly planned to essay Tony's mother, Karen Canzonieri, when he broke into her apartment early one morning. Karen was known to Del Vecchio. The previous evening he had visited the residence and used Mary Jane with others. He found little Tony on the first level of the residence when he broke in the following morning. It seems that Del Vecchio killed Tony because he did not want him to get in the way of his relationship with Karen. The youngster was nearly decapitated when he slashed his throat viciously, destroying his trachea, carotid artery, jugular vein, and vagus nerve. He also fractured his third and fourth vertebrae. After stuffing Tony's body into a crawl space, Del Vecchio went upstairs to Karen's bedroom and essayed her. When he briefly left Karen alone, she managed to get away and called the police. Del Vecchio was hiding on the roof when the police arrived. When he was first apprehended, he said, "I didn't kill nobody." On November 23, 1995, George Del Vecchio passed away at Stateville Correctional Center, a jail located 60 miles southwest of Chicago, by lethal injection. After having a heart attack at the end of the previous month, Del Vecchio had an angioplasty on November 3 to open a clogged artery. His attorneys argued that the medication he was taking impairs his judgment and renders him ineligible for execution, notwithstanding his jailer's declaration that he was fit. At 12:24 a.m., Del Vecchio was carried into the execution chamber of the prison and given a death dose of 3 deadly chemicals. "God bless Rosie," Del Vecchio remarked, referring to his ex-wife. He sighed and closed his eyes as the chemicals invaded his nervous system. In a lengthy and scathing statement prior to the execution, Del Vecchio said he was ashamed of his home state and blasted the state of Illinois for wrongfully executing him. His final meal consisted of filet mignon with mushrooms, shellfish, a baked potato with sour cream, Brussels sprouts, corn on the cob, salad with Italian dressing, pistachio flavor ice cream, and 2 cannoli. Raymond Lee Stewart, September 18, 1996. He murdered 6 people during a week-long rampage in Rockford, Illinois and Beloit, Wisconsin in 1981. Born in 1952 in Burlington, North Carolina, Stewart grew up in a violent household. When he was just 14 years old, his father kicked him out of the house and told him never to return, and he regularly essayed and physically abused his 9 children. Stewart left school and worked at a number of jobs. He eventually relocated to Rockford, Illinois. He committed multiple robberies in 1973. After entering a guilty plea to 4 charges of armed robbery, he received a prison sentence ranging from 5 to 15 years. After serving 6 years, Stewart was released on parole after another robbery count was dropped for lack of evidence. Stewart drew his revolver on a landlord in December 1980 because the man refused to return a $50 security deposit. He found out a month later that his girlfriend had had her tubes tied without notifying him after giving birth to their daughter. As a result of both incidents, Stewart's anger grew. He said years later that he also desired retribution for his previous conviction for robbery. Stewart used a .38 caliber handgun to shoot and kill Willie Fred, a 54-year-old store owner who had seen one of Stewart's thefts in 1973, and his stock boy Albert Pearson, 20, in the afternoon of January 27, 1981, in Rockford's West Side. At a patrol station 2 miles away the following day, Stewart shot and killed Kevin Kaiser, an 18-year-old service station attendant. Stewart murdered 35-year-old service station attendant Kenny Faust in a 24-hour period. Richard Boak, 21, and Donald Rains, 26, were both found shot in the head inside a Radio Shack in a Beloit, Wisconsin mall, marking the end of Stewart's spree. After guiding the 2 guys to the rear of the shop, Stewart shot them many times. On February 21, 1981, Stewart was located and taken into custody in Greensboro, North Carolina, after authorities linked him to the killings. On September 18, 1996, Stewart was put to death by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center. He had fried perch, coleslaw, potato salad, canned peaches, and fruit juice for the last meal. His last words were, "Hello to everyone. May you all have peace because of this. May my victims' families have peace." A little over a year later, a second double execution took place in Illinois. Walter Stewart, November 19, 1997. He was found guilty of killing 2 individuals during a heist at a jewelry store. Walter's parents abandoned him when he was a baby. His abusive grandma and his mentally ill, delusional grandfather were left to raise him. Walter was influenced by his elder cousin, who helped him become addicted to drugs and lead a life of crime. Walter was under the influence of morphine, codeine, and Valium at the time of the crime. Linda Manzano owned a jewelry business in Berwyn, Illinois. She was in the store one Sunday in February 1980 with her brother, Danilo Rodica, her boyfriend, Thomas Pavlopoulos, a worker called Laura Lansinger, and Rodica's daughter, who was just 9 years old. At 1:30 p.m., Stewart, pretending to be a customer, initially went into the store, requested to see a variety of jewelry, and then departed. Between 4:30 and 5, he came back, pulled out a handgun, and declared he was robbing the store. He used his revolver to signal the 2 men and Linda Manzano, who were in front of him, to step aside after finishing the heist. Laura Lansinger and the kid were in the back room. When Linda Manzano took a step back, Stewart shot her in the abdomen, but the men remained still. With the help of the injured woman, the 2 men jumped Stewart to stop him from shooting, but they failed. Stewart pushed the woman to the ground and fired 4 rounds, striking both males. Stewart shot Rodica once more while his body twitched on the ground. The gun was empty, so he hurried to the rear room, aimed it at Linda Lansinger's face and pulled the trigger, but all that was heard was a click. By the time Stewart left the store, the police had come and taken him into custody after Lansinger, who had concealed the child, had pressed the panic button. Stewart was pronounced dead at 12:30 a.m. In his final words, he said, "I love Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior." He then took 2 deep breaths prior to being declared dead. No members of Stewart's family, nor family members of the victims, were present at the execution. The 42-year-old Stewart was offered a sedative, but he declined. He also declined the religious service, although he requested and received the Bible. There are no records of his final meal. Derlin Edmunds, November 19, 1997. Derlin Edmunds was sentenced to death in 1980 for the 1977 murder of 9-year-old African-American Richard Miller. Edmunds was diagnosed as schizophrenic in 1973 but received no treatment for his illness throughout a 3-month stay in hospital. Strong doubts were expressed regarding his competence to stand trial between 1977 and 1980, during which time he was diagnosed with schizophrenia on 6 occasions. Edmunds was 25 when he committed the crime. He called down to the alley beneath his flat early on October 27, 1977, and invited 9-year-old Richard Miller to come upstairs. When Richard got upstairs, Edmunds saw that the youngster was bleeding from his private parts. He had seen the boy with 2 men. He informed Richard that, like the other men, he wanted to have relations with him. Richard was instructed to undress by Edmunds. The previous essay had left Richard covered in filth and blood. Edmunds used toilet paper and a damp cloth to clean him. Richard was placed on a piece of plastic that Edmunds had prepared on the bed and started to sodomize him. The youngster began to cry and begged Edmunds to stop since he was causing him pain. The criminal slammed Richard's body face down into a pillow in an attempt to quiet him. He did not want the youngster to wake up his grandma in the bedroom next door. Richard stopped breathing. Edmunds saw that the boy's breathing was not right after he finished the act, and after attempting to resuscitate him, he searched for a location to hide the body. He disposed of the boy's clothes and the supplies he had used to clean him up in a yellow garbage bag and disposed of the body in a waste dumpster in the lane beneath his apartment. In a neighboring alley, he tossed the bag and its contents. On the day of his execution, Edmunds had no last words. 4 minutes after receiving a fatal injection, he gurgled and drew 2 gasping breaths. At 1:35 a.m., the coroner declared him dead. The execution was attended by 3 members of Edmunds's family. Edmunds, 45, received a sedative before being put to death. He watched television and called family in his last hours. There are no records of his final meal. Lloyd Wayne Hampton, January 21, 1998. At the hotel in Troy where Roy Pendleton had lived since he was widowed, Lloyd Hampton knocked on his door. After asking to use the restroom, Hampton robbed Roy while brandishing a knife. Prior to his murder, Hampton tormented Roy by taping his lips, hands, and feet, hogtied him with a dog collar, teased him with a chef's knife, burned his eyelid with a cigarette, sliced his forehead, and then stabbed him in the neck. According to the police, he was cool as a cucumber. No regrets. Hampton, a 7th grade dropout, had been incarcerated for the majority of his life and had only been released 4 years prior, in 1973. Prior convictions for robbery and assault with a deadly weapon were the result of Hampton's 1987 tormenting of a lady in Bakersfield, California. He claimed that he killed Roy in order to avoid being discovered. For his last meal, he only asked for a cigarette and a cup of coffee. Andrew Cocorellis, March 17, 1999. An organized crime ring consisting of rapists, necrophiles, cannibals, and serial killers was known as the Chicago Rippers or the Ripper Crew. The members of the group were brothers Andrew and Thomas Cocorellis, Edward Spratzer, and Robin Gecht. They were suspected of killing 17 women in Illinois in 1981 and 1982 and of shooting a man dead in a random drive-by shooting. On May 23, 1981, 28-year-old Linda Sutton became the gang's first victim after being kidnapped. Her body was discovered in a field near Villa Park, Illinois, 10 days later. Her left breast had been removed and her body had been dismembered. The gang didn't attack for over a year. They kidnapped Lorraine Borowski on May 15, 1982, right before she began her job as a realtor. 5 months later, her body was found in a Clarendon Hills cemetery. Shui Mack was kidnapped from Hanover Park, a village northwest of Villa Park, on May 29. 4 months passed before her body was discovered. They picked up Angel York in their vehicle 2 weeks after kidnapping Mack, chained her, cut her breast, and threw her out of the van while she was still alive. York's account of her assailants did not yield any leads. It was 2 months before the gang struck again. Sandra Delaware's body was found on the Chicago River's shore on August 28, 1982. Her left breast had been removed, she had been strangled, and she had been stabbed. Rose Davis, 31, was discovered in an alley on September 8 with nearly the same injuries as Delaware. In the random drive-by shooting on October 6, 1982, the gang shot 28-year-old local drug dealer Rafael Tirado and his companion, 18-year-old Alberto Rosario, at a phone booth. Spritzer said the elder man instructed him to slow down while they were traveling together. Gecht grabbed 2 firearms from the rear of the vehicle, ordered Spritzer to halt, and then started shooting at Tirado and Rosario, striking them both. Tirado passed away in a hospital from his wounds, but Rosario lived through them. The only male victim of the group was Tirado. The gang's last offense was perpetrated that same day. Beverly Washington, a prostitute, was discovered beside a train track after Robin Gecht alone enticed her into his car by paying more money than was requested. Her right breast was badly cut and her left breast had been severed, among other injuries. She was able to describe Gecht and his van where the incident occurred, and she lived through it. The men were suspected of being involved in the disappearance of Milt Papa's wife, Carol Papas, who was a pitcher for the Chicago Cubs. On September 11, 1982, she vanished. 5 years later, her body was found, and the cause of death was determined to be an accident. Since there was not enough evidence to link Gecht to the crimes, he had to be freed when he was originally taken into custody. However, after more research, the police found that he and 3 pals had hired a room in a motel in 1981, each of them having an adjoining room. According to the hotel management, they seemed to be part of some sort of a cult and had hosted noisy parties. Police linked Robin Gecht's van to an October 6 attack, leading to his initial arrest on October 20, 1982. Gecht was freed after posting bond a few days later. On November 5, police apprehended Gecht once more before locating the other 3 guys, Edward Spritzer and the Cocorelli's brothers. After being charged, Gecht was placed under $1 million bond. After being taken into custody on November 7, Andrew Cocorellis and Spritzer admitted to committing up to 17 killings. They were charged and ordered to be jailed without bond 3 days later. On November 12, Thomas Cocorellis was taken into custody. He admitted under questioning that he and the others had brought women back to Gecht's home, which Gecht referred to as a satanic chapel. The women were tortured, assayed, and had their breasts removed with a wire garrote. Cocorellis continued by saying that Gecht would masturbate into the severed breasts before placing them in a box, and that they would consume portions of the breasts as a sort of ceremony. According to Cocorellis, he once noticed 15 breasts in a package. Due to insufficient evidence, Gecht, the only gang member to insist on his innocence, was never put on trial for any of the killings. He was found guilty in 1983 of essay for the non-fatal assault of Beverly Washington, aggravated kidnapping, deviant sexual assault, and attempted murder. Gecht received a 120-year prison term. Judge Francis J. Mahan informed Gecht prior to his punishment, "Only a devil would do these things. These actions are not what an animal would do, a monster would." Danville Correctional Center is where Gecht is completing his term. When he turns 88 on October 10, 2042, he is expected to be eligible for parole. In an attempt to gain mercy, Spritzer entered a guilty plea in 1984 to charges of murder in the murders of Rafael Tirado, Rose Davis, Sandra Delaware, and Shui Mack, as well as essay, deviant essay, aggravated kidnapping, and attempted murder. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Spritzer was found guilty in 1986 of Linda Sutton's murder and aggravated kidnapping. The death penalty was the prosecution's goal. Carol Anfinson, Spritzer's lawyer, contended during the sentencing phase that Spritzer was immature, compulsive, and simplistic, and was carrying out the directives of Robin Gecht, the gang's leader. He was lonely and would do almost anything to impress his companion, according to her description. The prosecution characterized Spritzer as every woman's nightmare and referred to the gang as cowardly weasels who roamed in packs to prey on women. Spratzer received a death sentence. In 2003, Governor George Ryan commuted the sentence of all Illinois death row inmates, including Spratzer, to life in prison without the possibility of release. Notably, little over 2 months into his term, Governor Ryan only executed one person, which was Andrew Kokorellis. Andrew was also the last prisoner to be executed in Illinois, nearly 12 years until Governor Pat Quinn commuted 15 death sentences to life in prison without the possibility of parole and signed legislation abolishing the death penalty on March 9, 2011. Andrew Kokorellis was found guilty in 1985 of Rose Davis's murder, aggravated kidnapping, and essay. His lawyer stated during the sentencing phase that his client had been a follower, not an organizer, not the prime mover, in the murder of Davis. After 90 minutes of deliberation, the jury decided not to execute Andrew, and he was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Andrew was found guilty on March 18, 1987, of Lorraine Borowski's murder and aggravated kidnapping. He received a death sentence on April 30, 1987, and on March 17, 1999, he was put to death by lethal injection. He refused the final meal. His last words were, "To the Borowski family, I am truly sorry for your loss. I mean this sincerely. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." The brothers Kokorellis grew up in a Greek Orthodox household. The Orthodox Church made an unsuccessful attempt to prevent the execution of Andrew Kokorellis. After the execution, Demetrios Kantsavelos, who was then the chancellor, later a bishop of the Greek Orthodox metropolis of Chicago, turned against the death sentence and supported efforts to abolish it in the state. Thomas Kokorellis was found guilty of Lorraine Borowski's murder and essay. In exchange for his thorough confession, he received a life sentence without the possibility of release. Thomas received a fresh trial for his murder conviction after his essay conviction was overturned on appeal. Thomas accepted a 70-year sentence after entering a guilty plea to Borowski's murder rather than facing a trial. The plea deal included the dismissal of charges related to Linda Sutton's murder. After failing to find an approved place to reside, Thomas was denied release, even though his parole was set for September 30, 2017. On March 29, 2019, he was freed from prison. Thomas was a resident in Aurora, Illinois for a while, starting June 30, 2019. As of 2024, he resides in Peoria, Illinois. 18-year-old David Gecht, the son of Robin Gecht, was accused in March 1999 with first-degree murder for the gang-related death of 35-year-old Roberto Cruz in northwest Chicago on January 29, 1999. Two other guys were also charged, Ruben Hernandez, 27, and Richard Quill, 19. The triggerman, David Gecht, received a 45-year prison sentence after being found guilty of first-degree murder. Capital punishment has been repealed in the U.S. state of Illinois since 2011. Bruce Rauner, the Republican governor at the time, demanded in 2018 that the death sentence be reinstated for anybody found guilty of killing police officers. State lawmakers refused this, and Democrat J.B. Pritzker went on to defeat Rauner. Crimes these men committed were so heinous, yet only one of them was executed. When I saw that one is actually free right as we speak, I couldn't believe it. These are the types of criminals that truly deserve the capital punishment, but somehow they manage to avoid it. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.